Then on Sports Central, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the Week 5 matchup between the Ole Miss Rebels and the LSU Tigers, two of your top teams in the SEC. As we look forward to Week 5, LSU, of course, being a team that lost in Week 1, disappointing loss to Florida State, but since then, this team has bounced back. They have won 3 straight games, and this team is very much still in contention. They should not be counted out. But obviously, this is a huge matchup in Week 5. The pressure is on as they take on Ole Miss. And the Rebels are a team coming off of a tough loss to Alabama, but this team is still 3-1, very much still in contention. But obviously, for both teams at this point, both having one loss, this is a huge game for both teams moving forward. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today. Let's get started with your team trends. LSU beat Arkansas 34-31 last week. Definitely a close matchup. Maybe a bit closer as some would expect, but Arkansas is also still a talented football team. I know they're not ranked and they really don't have super high expectations at this point, but Arkansas is still a good football team. So, I mean, despite the close game and everything, still a big win for LSU. And I mean, you look at Ole Miss on the other side, losing to Alabama 10-24. Alabama lost to Texas at home a couple of weeks ago. They lost in Tuscaloosa, but that is a very rare thing. It is not easy to beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. So for Ole Miss, obviously being a team that playing pretty well heading into last week's matchup, that was definitely a disappointment, losing to them by a couple of touchdowns. But that was kind of the same story, though, last season with Ole Miss, too. You consider the hot start this team had last season. They were a top 10 team for a while. Then the second half of the season came around, some huge matchups against good football teams, and that's where Ole Miss started to fall apart a bit. So, I mean, for Ole Miss this season, this is a very talented football team this season. I mean, this is a critical matchup for them to get over the hump, beat a good top 15 opponent in LSU, and this is as good of a chance as they're going to get here in Week 5. Games be on Saturday, September 30th in Oxford, so yeah, Ole Miss being at home for this one. Kickoff is 5 p.m. Central. Spread's going with LSU by 2, so the Tigers are favored slightly, but the FPI does disagree with that, going with Ole Miss 56%, and the over-under is pretty high for an SEC matchup. 67 is where the line is right now. Series history, LSU leads at 65-41. LSU won the last matchup. We did see Ole Miss win in 2021, but obviously both teams are definitely different since then. And LSU has won 7 out of the past 10. So for Ole Miss, they have won 3 of the past 10, even though LSU has been dominant throughout much of the series. Your stat comparison, LSU, 33rd in points per game. This is a strong offensive team. You consider Jaden Daniels, really, who broke through last season. He's had a good start to the year, nearly 1,300 passing yards, 12 touchdowns over 2 picks. And I mean, this is a very strong offensive team. You look at Malik Neighbors as well. He's been incredible so far. He's already got over 500 yards, and we're only a third of the way into the season. So Neighbors is a huge threat, definitely a guy that Ole Miss needs to keep in check if they want any chance of beating this LSU team. But defensively, I mean, LSU has proven to be a bit vulnerable. We kind of saw that last week against Arkansas, where they allowed 31 points. And then obviously to Florida State in Week 1, where things kind of fell apart in the second half, ended up allowing 45. So for Ole Miss being a team that's definitely strong offensively, I mean, that's going to be a huge thing for them, is putting up points, especially early in this game, getting off to a good start. But I would say the Rebels, though, are a very balanced team. This team is also strong defensively. Obviously, I think the biggest standout game for Ole Miss so far this season was against Tulane. They're in Week 2 on the road, beating them 37-20. Tulane's a good football team. They didn't have their starting quarterback, Michael Pratt, in that game, but still, I mean, scoring 37 and then playing against a good offense, only allowing 20 was definitely impressive. But your recent matchups otherwise, I mean, for Ole Miss, the loss to Alabama 10-24, couldn't get anything going offensively there, even though in their first 3 matchups they had no problem scoring more than 30 on their teams. Like Mercer put 70 on them, beat Georgia Tech 48-23. So we've seen what this offense can do. It's just the defense. Can this defense keep some good football teams in check? And I mean, obviously against Alabama, played pretty good against their offense. Did allow 24, but it was just the offense that couldn't get anything going. If you look at LSU on the other side, allowed 45 to Florida State. And Florida State turns out to be a really good football team. But since then, LSU has bounced back, scored 72 on Grambling, 41-14 win over Mississippi State, then the win over Arkansas, 34-31. Your key points for this one, both teams 3-1. LSU is a team that should not be counted out quite yet. And honestly, that kind of goes for both teams. I feel like both teams are talented enough to still be contenders. The problem is at this point, both teams have already taken a loss, and you consider that. I mean, the pressure's on for both teams moving forward. You pretty much have to run the table in the season if you want a really good chance to be in the college football playoff. I mean, a second loss pretty much knocks you out, as the rest of the country, a lot of losses, big upsets happen. So, I mean, you consider that LSU, this is a stacked football team still, very talented team. The defense has been inconsistent. I mean, last week against Arkansas, allowing 31, definitely was not super impressive. But, I mean, we've seen the potential of this team, and this is a experienced team that is built to win this season. But, I mean, once again, this is very much a college football playoff contender, but the pressure is high. And, I mean, the stakes are pretty high for this being a Week 5 game, because the loser of this game is pretty much knocked out of contention for the college football playoff, more than likely. I mean, SEC contention is still up in the air, but, I mean, college football playoff at that point is starting to look pretty dim. But for Ole Miss, this is a team that's got talent. They've got a high ceiling, but they've had trouble in big games. I mean, you consider last season, mentioned that towards the end of the year where this team kind of fell apart, and obviously against Alabama last week. I mean, getting wins in the big games is a huge thing for Ole Miss, and this is a huge opportunity for them as they've got home field advantage, and obviously home field advantage comes at a great time against LSU. But with that, let's get the prediction here for LSU and Ole Miss coming up here in Week 5. This is a matchup that the stakes are pretty high considering it's a late September matchup. And with that, this one is one I went back and forth on, but I'm going to be taking Ole Miss. 38-34 is my predicted final score. Going with the higher scoring one here. I think you got two really solid offenses, and defensively both teams are strong as well. But I think offense takes over in this one, and Ole Miss gets a huge win. I think this is one that could go a long way for Ole Miss. I mean, LSU is a team that is very much talented, very much able to win this one. But Ole Miss being at home and coming off of an Alabama loss on the road that was definitely brutal last week, I think they find a way to bounce back from that and get the win here 38-34. But this is one that is about as 50-50 as it gets. It could absolutely go either way. I'm going to say 55% towards Ole Miss. I'm taking the over. I think we see a higher scoring matchup here. Ole Miss to cover the spread as well. I mean, you consider both teams in this matchup. This is a matchup between two very talented teams. I feel like both teams are still in contention no matter the outcome of this game, even though obviously the loser of this game having two losses already in the season, it definitely looks a college football playoff chance looks distant. But I feel like LSU is still such a talented football team to the point where you can't count out LSU, especially if they do lose this matchup. But with that, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this matchup, your score predictions, all of that. Let me know in the comments, and stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.